Well, the stakes are extremely high. I mean, I think where we need to start here is to understand the broader context, which is this is an act of war. To launch an assassination-style attack like this on not only one of the top military figures in Iran, but really one of the top social, political, even cultural figures inside of the country, going back decades, in fact, is in a third country where he was a guest, and not only a guest, but extremely very popular, is the type of provocation that is so aggressive that it can only really be designed to incur some form of retaliation from Iran on the United States, somewhere in the region perhaps, or somewhere in the world, and to force the two countries into a broader and deeper conflict. The implications of the stakes, as I mentioned, are almost genocidal. I mean, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people died in the invasion of Iraq. Now you think about a regional war that spills over into 5, 6, 7 countries, how much more that could be. It seemed almost fanciful. First and foremost, I hope people could take one step back and think about what it means for the United States to be going to war in this kind of national enemy perspective, right? That means that it's being done in your name. You might be sitting at home and saying, well, I think this is ridiculous. I think we shouldn't be doing anything about this. But the US government is attempting to say, no, we're doing this for you. We're doing this on your behalf. And what does it really mean for us as people living here in the United States to have hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions if this goes as wide as maybe it could, of people being killed, being wounded, being maimed, being forced from their homes, turned into refugees in our name. I mean, that's deeply, deeply perverse from my point of view as someone who completely disagrees with these policies. And that's why it's important for people to stand up, to have their voices heard, to demonstrate, to do whatever you can to oppose these kind of conflicts. We're taught really to have a racist attitude towards those who are the quote unquote enemies of this country, that they are dehumanized, that we forget who they are, but we can't forget who they are. We can't dehumanize these people because they are being brutally victimized by a government that is, unfortunately the one that we live under, which means that, we have to speak up if we want to make a change. And I think that's, just the first and most important impact for Americans to really think about is what's being done in our name. I think the only people who benefit from this drive to war are the people who want the United States, the imperialist 1% ruling class who feel the U.S. should control the whole world and determine what every country does. And that includes, of course, the weapons makers who are making huge amounts of money, the security contractors working in the intelligence world. But it's broader and it's bigger and it's beyond that, because what is this really about? What is U.S. control really about? Well, the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman once said that McDonald's doesn't work without McDonnell Douglas. That at the end of the day, for these U.S. massive monopolies and corporations to be able to go into any market, to exploit any worker, to make the maximum amount of profit, that it has to be sort of backed up by something. Like, what is it that really backs up the ability of the United States to do essentially whatever it wants to do? And that's the US military. And when you think about who benefits, that's who really benefits. It's the imperial ruling class, 1% ruling elite, whatever you want to call them. The type of people whose livelihood, whose bottom line is what grows when the US has this complete and total control and uses military force to back it up. It's not the political parties that are going to represent you. People who are opposed to this war, you have to represent yourselves. People have to get organized. They have to come out into the streets. They have to push back. They have to struggle against these sorts of policies. We have to try to convince our friends and family who may be, rightfully confused with all of the, unbelievable propaganda flying around. I mean, already, 2 hours after Soleimani was killed, you've got almost all the major networks more or less taking the Pentagon line. So it's natural for people to be a little confused, to maybe think we should be doing this. And that's another thing we have to do, is we have to educate people about what's going on. Because, sadly and unfortunately, during the Obama administration, the Democrats really pushed very heavily many of the same policies as George W. Bush and said, oh, but it's good now. And so you've got, a lot of misinformation going back many years prior to the Trump administration. And we really have to educate people about this long history of U.S. attempts to control this region, the destabilizations that have resulted, the human costs that are there, and urge them to come out with us, to organize with us, to get into the streets. And I have to say, I've already seen, and I was someone who really became involved politically because of the first Iraq War, and I've already seen more in just the past 12 or so hours after the assassination of Soleimani in terms of the, not excitement of people, the outrage of people, but willingness to come out, willingness to protest, the growth of demonstrations and others in just a couple of days, sometimes in just a few hours. And to me, that's a really heartening fact. We have to continue it. We need to amplify it. We need to push it forward, because at the end of the day, if you really want to stop these wars, you have to become an independent force. The anti-war movement has to become a force that can't be ignored inside of the country by any political, social, or economic actor, no matter who they are. We have to enforce the will of the people for no more war, U.S. out of Iraq, U.S. out of the Middle East, no war with Iran.